Good morning, everyone. Appreciate your time today. Welcome to our first inaugural State of Cybersecurity. We know you all are busy and you've all got lots of things on your plate, so we appreciate your time. Um, Before we go too far, I want to recognize our sponsors today. We've got some really good partners that you're going to get to hear from in some of the breakout rooms, starting with Stellar Cyber. They are one of our key technology partners. We've got BKD, who is a very large audit firm that you're going to hear about pen testing and some of the work they do. We've got Automox. Automox is one of our partners that helps us patch and keep our end customers patched. And they're going to talk about why it's important. And it's going to dovetail into the conversation that we have with Bob as well here in a minute. And finally, Evo. Evo is our multi-factor authentication tool that we use, and they're going to talk about why multi-factor is so important in protecting your environment. With that, I'm Dave Barton, CTO, Highwire Networks. For those of you who don't know much about who we are, hopefully through the day today, you're going to get to learn more about our background, our capabilities, why we're here, but more importantly, why we work together, right? Why it's important to have a partner that you can come together with and deliver services and technologies to help solve business problems. We're not really here to sell today. We're here to talk about the state of cybersecurity and how everybody that you're going to get to hear today is going to help you think through the problem maybe a little bit differently than you have in the past. My background, I've been a CISO in a couple of organizations. I'm CTO here. I've been doing cybersecurity longer than I care to admit. I tell people and Bob will tell you the same thing. When we started in cybersecurity, we had hair, and that didn't last long. So, it's and Bob's chuckling because he would agree that cybersecurity is not an easy thing to do. And so we want to talk about it. We want to talk about things we can help you think about, help you think through, and maybe help you think about it differently. So without further ado, you guys didn't join this early to hear me. You really came to hear Bob. So Bob, would you introduce yourself? And the other thing that we'll talk to, and I forgot, our fifth sponsor is Extra Hop. So we've got a breakout session around network detection and response. It's a phenomenal product, but more importantly, it helps solve some of the business problem, which is visibility. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But Bob, please introduce yourself. Folks, at the bottom of your screen, there is a question and answer. So if you have questions, feel free to pose them. Bob and I are just going to talk back and forth, but we'd love to get your questions, get your input, anything we can do to help raise the awareness across the board we want to do. So Bob, I know I said without further ado a few times, but now it's about you. So please take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. And Bob Bigman, I'll tell you exactly how many years I've been doing it. I've been doing it for 38 years now. I spent my first 30 in the U.S. government as a cybersecurity officer for the CIA in all areas of cyber, from cryptography to threat analysis, vulnerability assessments, policy development, the full range of cybersecurity. I spent the last 15 years at the agency as the CISO, responsible for the defensive program. I retired in 2012 and have been a cybersecurity consultant. I'm referred to as whatever it means, a boutique consultant. I still never learned what that one it means, but anyways, I work for companies, big, small, global governments, the U.S. government, NATO organizations, on all aspects of cybersecurity. I mostly focus on hacking and getting organizations to understand what hackers are after, how they hack from a technical perspective, and most importantly, what organizations have to do to protect themselves. For the last about 4 years, the topic has really been, no surprise, ransomware. So I have become involved in all aspects of pre-ransomware preventive planning, helping organizations build their technical defenses, their programmatic defenses. I've been involved in ransomware incidents, including negotiating with hackers on ransomware. Whoever thought I'd be doing that. And post-ransomware analytics, helping people understand what happened to you and what things you need to do to prevent it happening. Again, there was an article this morning about how organizations are now being re-attacked by ransomware hacking organizations. I've never experienced it, but I've heard there's now incidents of that where they're actually keeping malware in the network for them to call back and use again, so they can make more trips to the Bitcoin machine. So it's an ugly area, and so I'm going to talk about quickly 2 stories that I was involved in to give you an understanding of, obviously, the technical attack, but I also want you to understand that there's a human face to this that you don't read about and you don't see in media. It's always about the technique, and they talk a lot about the hacking group, but not a lot about the victim. What I learned is, these victims are real people in real organizations. In the first organization I worked with, it frankly began as a mom and pop business, which grew into a global business in an industry that's very important to the U.S. government. And they provide a specialized service and specialized capability for supporting critical infrastructure. And everything they do relies on their network. They communicate to their global suppliers. They monitor the movement of their product. They bill, of course. They do customer interface, CRM. Everything's done. The whole industry revolves around connectivity, and their business, their enterprise network, is the key part of the network, is a key part of their organization. I came into the organization probably about a year prior, helping them prepare for possible ransomware and malware attacks, which they were increasingly seeing. And I gave them a list of things to do, which they mostly did. Didn't completely get them done, but mostly did them. And they were very fearful that they were being targeted. In fact, they got a report from a U.S. government agency telling them that we think you're on a list, so prepare. And we did. But we didn't prepare enough. And the fact that they, in November last year, they were hit with a ransomware payload. And I'm not going to go into the details of the actual payload because it will probably identify the party. I can't say it was Russian. I can't say it was a Windows-based malware payload that took advantage of the authentication process that was frankly vulnerable in the Duo gateway, which is owned by Pulse Secure, and there were vulnerabilities noted. The vulnerabilities were first patched, but the patch wasn't actually correct, or it didn't work correctly. The hackers still took advantage of it. Anyways, they were able to use that connection from a corporate PC that allowed for split tunneling, by the way. And they were able to take over that machine. And when they had an active session, and when I say they had an active session, they were the domain admins. And they were able to use those sessions to upload their malware and frankly take control or take access to and then take control of their Active Directory infrastructure. Once you're in Active Directory, as we like to say in the government, the game is over.
So to be clear, they leveraged a VPN connection. They uploaded malware because they allowed split tunneling, right? So there's some basic best practices that shouldn't have been happening.
It was on my list.
Right. And they injected code.
Yeah.
Okay. Please
They
continue.
injected code. They took over the credentials of the gateway. So one of the things I hate about VPNs is they all run with high privileges. They don't necessarily need to, by the way, but of course, we ought to make sure everything works all the time. So what do? We give it the highest level credentials. I'm sorry. So so once they had those credentials, they were able to use the processes that the authentication. I don't want to get too involved in the detail, but the authentication protocol that they connect to with LDAP to basically do their authentication to the directory service, in this case AD, and then use those exploits to get in. They immediately got in and they took over the domain admin groups. The very first thing they did do is they looked to do reconnaissance and understand where their backup services were at and what groups managed both the backup technology and the people who were doing the backup, and made sure they were members of those groups as well, took over those accounts. And because they wanted to make sure that they didn't have access to their backups, their online backups. They were not, by the way, offline backups. Remember, that's a clue here. They were online. So they were able to install their malware. They locked up the directories that had their Oracle databases in, or basically which was the heart of the organization. They backed up, they locked up their share files. They encrypted all their share files. They encrypted their backup utilities, the software utility routine directories. They encrypted the backup volumes going back a year. They left the grandfather one-up directory that had about a year out because they didn't want to put them totally out of business. But frankly, in this industry that they were in, not having a day's or 2 days backup is going to hurt their business, and it did. 2 days later, they got the notice when the admin tried to log on to do an administrative function. That's when the malware activated the notification alert and told them that basically we now connect to your network and took over your file system, blah blah blah, and your files are all encrypted. For more information, contact us here at this email, which they did. They were told where to go and how much they had to pay in order to get the key and the software utility. You had to get both, one by itself. You had to get them from 2 different places at 2 different times. And then you get that once you paid at the local Bitcoin wallet. Now, from a national perspective, of course, the FBI and everyone would tell you, don't pay. Well, this organization, frankly, because of the COVID year, business was down. They were frankly struggling, and now this happened. And frankly, and these were wonderful people. They were frankly probably going to go out of business. So they did pay the ransom, and in fact, within 3-4 hours, they got a link to a website here in the United States, temporary domain, which they were able to download both the utility. Then they were emailed a key, 256 AES, and it worked fine. They were able to direct it at all the payloads, and in fact, everything worked. They were back up and running in about 50 minutes. Yeah.
5-0?
5-0.
Wow.
Yeah. The utility basically had to mount some volumes. They were using VMware, so they actually had to build some virtual volumes to actually run the decryption utility. But the utility basically told them how to do that.
Wow.
And basically, once they had that, then they could run off those and then restore those back to the primaries, and then they were up and running. They pretty much had the business up and running in 50 minutes.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, I was surprised too. I mean, they had run through these scenarios of exactly how they would do this if they had to do it. The bad news was they had to do it, right?
Wow.
Had they not paid, as I said, they would have been. There's no way that they could have survived in their industry. They just didn't have the ability to connect to their organizations and their quote far-flung global empire.
So two questions. One is,
sure.
Do you have any, or can you share how much the ransom was?
No.
Is it?
Yeah.
Can you give me a range?
Less than $1 million.
Okay. All right. So we have a question from one of our participants.
Sure.
Why couldn't they use their backups?
Because the backups were encrypted.
Okay.
As I said before, they took over both the accounts, the system account, and the people group. More importantly, the people group who were running the and they basically made themselves members of that group. And then when they ran the utility, they ran it through a payload that they did that's unique to the Windows backup utility, and basically runs it through a filter and does the encryption.
Any when you did the forensic work, was there any visibility to how long they were there before they let the payload go?
Not clear, but I would say 2 weeks at least.
Okay.
They did a lot of their first level was quiet reconnaissance, and they were listening. For example, they spent a lot of time studying and analyzing the backup services that they had available to them. They wanted to be sure that they were able to get admin accesses and retain admin accesses, right? So they used an existing account of a real person who was really there. They were hiding very well. So you only do that through learning and discovering, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
They knew they looked to see what security software was running. They basically did an analysis to run and see if what was running in certain directories.
Okay. Another question we have, the VPN service account, was it running as an admin?
Yeah.
Or was the user's login to the VPN as an admin account?
Both happened. So the service runs on the network as an admin account in AD. And the person who was, because the admins weren't on site, they were using it to basically log in with their domain admin account.
Okay. Do you anything that you recommend to protect VPNs?
Yeah, VPNs are bad news. So when you pull back the basics, pull back the capabilities of VPNs, underneath there's a basic RPC kind of thing going on, and in the global nation state hacker world, RPC is known as the gift that keeps on giving.
True story.
Right. And there's not a whole lot, and the hackers know this as well. I'm not a big fan of VPN technology, frankly. I think they're all horrible from a security perspective. There are some things you can do. You can run I would certainly use an SSL sleeve before I ever started up a VPN. I would even think of using an SSL sleeve with a self-signed certificate, so it wasn't a common, known. It would have something that you were given with a special certificate. I would only do it inside of an encrypted session. Of course, I would always use MFA. Now they were using MFA, but remember what I told you. They had MFA is not really helpful if you allow for split tunneling, because all you're doing is telling the bad guys, as in they did in this case, that okay, the admin session is now open. You can now download anything you want to the program directory for the VPN and have it uploaded to the server.
Got
it. The fact that they had MFA was nice, but it wasn't really relevant to this attack.
Okay.
But yeah, I would certainly use MFA.
Where does I'm seeing a lot of industry movement away from traditional VPN to zero trust models. Talk a little bit about that, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Zero trust, let's face it, it's largely the latest bumper sticker in a long history of cybersecurity bumper stickers that you and I have both experienced. It means many things to many people. The notion, though, that I do like, that I think is that when you have people who are dialing in remotely over a VPN in this case, that because they're coming from a more risky environment, that you do have to limit what they get access to. Now, the problem is that's not how we work. You know, the whole idea of working from home is so you can get access to what you use,
That's right?
So, well, they say, well, you got to do zero trust. Well, I'd like to do zero trust, but zero trust is not my working model. You know, I have people working across the globe in various places, including now from home, and they need the same access as they need to at work. So this notion of zero trust is lovely, and it makes for great, verbiage in an executive order, right? What it actually means in practice is not at all clear. I would rather they focus more on cybersecurity hardening, cybersecurity hygiene, cybersecurity measures, right? Technical measures that really work, as opposed to this kind of obscure notion, in my mind, of zero trust.
Okay. So I'm just going to answer or ask some more of the questions we're seeing. Would MFA have stopped the lateral movement in the hack that the first case that we're talking about?
You mean inside on the internal network? Probably would have helped a lot, because now for them, in order to get access to another part of the network, if they had to use a multi-factor. Now, one of the reasons why they go after AD right away is to add themselves to the multi-factor domain group.
Right.
Right. And they did, in fact, look to see, one of the security tools they would see is what multi-factor they were using. But since they had already blown past that, it wasn't that important to them. But on the internal network, yes, it would have probably helped somewhat. But this is all a timing issue. So again, all multi-factor authentication solutions that run off the internal network run from Active Directory. So you can put yourself in, take yourself out, make yourself a sometimes user, not every user of multi-factor, right? You can opt in, opt out. Well, once you control the list, what does it matter whether you have it or not?
That's fair. Do you see a lot of small businesses targeted by hackers? This was one of the questions that we're seeing.
Oh, yeah, that's the real ugly part of it is, they obviously want to take advantage of those who can't afford the high level protection products and services and have some money in the bank that they can walk off with. You're only hearing about and reading about 35 and 40% of the ransomware attacks. There's another 65 to 70% that's going after these small companies, like this one I told you about. They're not small, but they're certainly medium. They are global, and you didn't know. No one ever talked about this publicly.
Couple more questions.
Sure.
How did they get in the first place? Was it how did they get in to take advantage of the credentials? Yeah.
So as a result of the split tunnel, when they had this corporate PC, when the admin used it as they should not have done, when they used it to go out to the internet, they basically went to a website that dropped a reconnaissance tool that basically did discovery on that laptop to determine whether or not they had any other credentials stored on that laptop. And lo and behold, they found the classic domain admin directory, which everyone knows exactly where it's at in the Windows service directory. And that sent a message back to the hacking organization. Yeah, here's a laptop. And then they basically dropped some other reconnaissance to find out what it was using for a connection service. In this case, the VPN. Dropped in the remote VPN exploit kit, and away they went.
Okay. Do you want to talk? We've got some more questions, but I think we may answer them through some of your second story. Do you want to talk about your second case?
Yeah, so the second one's a little quicker. This was not a Windows story. This is now a larger organization, global multinational company, and they were actually attacked via Linux exploit. And this was not Russian, this was Chinese. And in this case, they took advantage of a direct connection into the organization's website, public website, which ran a frankly poorly patched Linux distro. This was Red Hat, using that, running also that. I always forget the name of it. It's Apache and something else all glued together. Basically, it's a distribution that Red Hat supports that has the web server, the monitoring services, the interface, PHP, all of it served up as one. Right.
Got it.
It hadn't been patched properly, like within 2 years.
Wow.
Chinese took it over at the root level and then found that it was basically talking back with SQL statements to a corporate database. They were able to run a classic information injected attack, basically SQL injection attack against the database, which took over the server on the internal network, beaconed out to a, at that point, unknown server, domain server, and was basically sending copies of corporate information, copies of very highly compressed DBs. The Chinese are really good at making big DB files into little DB files. Don't really know how they do it, but okay. And they also exported information. We also learned later they exfilled via some DNS header information as well. And it wasn't until, frankly, and by the way, this is an organization that had a fairly sophisticated security operations center, had a lot of people doing monitoring. We're getting a lot of signals, but had no idea that the Chinese hackers had been on their network for about 2 months. The only way they learned is eventually the domain name that they were exfilling the data to basically came up in the U.S. government's list of.
They got flagged.
They got flagged, right?
Yep.
That worked its way down to Cisco, who stuck it in the umbrella database, which they were using. And eventually, we're 2.5 months later, boom, the flags went off, and they looked at it and said, "Oh, we have an exploit, we have a hack. This just came up." Well, it didn't just came up.
Right.
You just saw it. And then we brought in, I guess it was Mandiant. Yeah, I think it was Mandiant at the time, came in and did the analysis, did an excellent job, and said, "Oh, yeah, you've been had and had been had for some time." Wow. And they were able to track it all the way back to this unpatched business administered, outsourced, contracted to India, subsourced, contracted back to somewhere else. I never really got the whole story, but the point was it wasn't patched. And it gave them basically a easy path into the corporate SQL and by the way, Oracle databases.
Wow.
Again, not a but still something you don't want to see happen.
No, so there was no ransomware involved, so there was no monetary damage outside of a loss of personal or intellectual property.
Yeah, the Chinese aren't really into ransomware. They're really into stealing data, right, and selling it in the black, and reselling it.
Okay,
right, and that's what this was. In fact, it wasn't too long after that they started selling off the information that they had, and these were on corporate business accounts. Got
it. Okay. So I'm going to come back to some of these questions, and my guess is it'll lead to others. Recently, we saw in the Colonial Pipeline hack where the U.S. government went and took some of the Bitcoin back.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to impact ransomware going forward?
Well, the hackers won't be as stupid. I'll be honest with you. Okay. I think, they were really good at hacking. They were really good at the payload. They were really good at the execution. They were really bad at payment processing. So they used only one blockchain, in this case, Bitcoin wallet. It had never received this much money before. It was brand new, set up, in time, and they basically were able to enable or allow the tools that the government had to easily flag that transaction.
Wow.
So my sense is if the hackers have any intelligence, and they do, especially the Russians, they won't do it that way. Okay, they'll break up the transactions. They'll make it more difficult, probably not impossible, but make it more difficult for the analytics to find. Just like they are able to run around, many of the cyber tools, right? They'll eventually figure out, all right, how do we have to figure out the payment processing part of this as well.
That's right.
And the other idea, to be honest with you, is they just may not use Bitcoin. They may not just use. There's plenty of other ways. There's Goldcoin. There's PayPal. There's whatever, right? You don't have to use blockchain ledger-based Bitcoin style, right? So that's just an option. You can put cash in a bag.
So that's going to lead to this next question. Then, when a company chooses to pay the ransom, what are the risks in your mind that they're going to get targeted again? Right. So if we think about the Colonial Pipeline, for example, right, the government took the money back. Do you think that incentivizes the bad guys to go after them again? Do you think they left little rats in the network that they can go access?
I don't think so. Again, their goal is to make money. That they're just looking for targets of opportunity. I don't think going after Colonial right now would be a wise thing, right? Okay. Too much public exposure, and as I said, there was an article this morning about them about organizations hacking back into companies they've already. I'll be honest with you, I don't know of a case of that happening, and I've talked to other people who do ransomware management, and they told me no, they've not heard it either. Again, the motivation of these groups is not is simply to look for targets of opportunity and make as much money as you can. And frankly, going back and targeting an organization you've already gone to, number one, the insurance company probably is not going to pay again. Right. The company may already be out of business. You may have, if you cleaned out the bank once, why do you think the funds, there's plenty of other targets out there, right, to go after anew. It just doesn't seem like the right approach.
Okay. Do you see any opportunity, or as you look forward, do you think we're going to see the U.S. holding these countries accountable that are harboring these fugitives? And more importantly, do you think they're going to start to find ways to help get the money back?
I think they're going to try. Will they be successful? I don't think so.
Sounds like a new startup venture for you.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's one I want to try, though.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, I this thing's fraught with difficulties. You need to obviously have the participation of the governments that these people are in.
Right.
And let me tell you something. These organizations that do this, they pay taxes.
They do.
Yeah, I mean, they pay service fees, they pay taxes, ISP fees. They don't just sit there for free and run this industry. This ransomware industry, as I call it, is also supporting the state financially.
That's right. It's a multi-billion-dollar initiative.
Right. So there's no real motivation for President Biden to convince Putin and convince others that you want to stop this, or and say, well, there's always a risk of hacking back. Geez, that really becomes potentially an ugly affair as well. I hope we don't do that, but that's always an option.
Number one thing you would do if you were trying to avoid these attacks, is it offline backups? Is it, what do you see as key takeaways for this audience? Yeah,
so that actually you answered it. It's not horribly technical. It's not even hard to do. But if today you were asking me, I would say I would make sure that I had offline immutable backup stores of all my critical data and software, and had it configured in such a way that was requisite to my need, right? If I'm doing a transaction system that needs its records and needs its logs, back from, just a day ago, an hour ago, well, guess what? I would go build a system or buy a system And by the way, AWS right now, for example, is building one. This tells you how important even the cloud service providers are thinking about this. You really need to think clearly about the whole notion of having immutable storage.
Okay.
And this idea that, well, they'll just go in and put, encrypted backups. Yeah, that's because they already were on. I mean, they already got access. There's not a whole lot you can do when they get access either way. But today, given that most organizations are not there, that's the very first thing I would do.
Okay. What are your thoughts on preventative measures and not preventative measures, but preventative analysis like attack and pen, scheduled assessments of your environment to help find the holes?
Not helpful. I mean, both the organizations I told you stories had active, the big company, the one with the Linux, had active red teaming, actually had a red teaming exercise going on at the same time because they thought that's who it was. And had a very large, well-staffed security operations center, did a lot of monitoring, the whole thing that completely compliant, SOC 2, Type 2, HIPAA, you name it, right? As I said before, I've talked to some of these hackers. They don't care about your compliance, and they don't care much about your organization from a monitoring perspective. They want to know how hard it is to break into your network. That's what they want to know. That's right. If you look at what they look for in their reconnaissance, that tells you what worries them. For example, one of the very first things they look for in the Linux environment is SE Linux. Very, very first question Russians look for.
Right. That's right.
Is SE Linux running? Yes, no. Yes. Oh, crap. That makes it hard.
Right.
Yeah. We got to spend more time. It's going to be harder. May raise our visibility. They look for the advanced EDRs to see if they're running as well, and which ones are being used. They look to see whether or not I think we discussed this the other day, that one of the very first things they look for is whether whitelisting is being used on the applications, right? Oh God, now we have to get the thing signed. Maybe there's an easier target somewhere else, so they do, as part of the reconnaissance, they're kind of doing a risk rating against you.
Yeah, that's fair. What do you think President Biden, his new executive order, do you think there'll be much impact on private companies? I've got my own opinion, but would love to get your perspective.
Yeah,
and kind of cover the executive order, because there's probably some folks on here who may not have read it yet.
Yeah, well, the bulk of the executive order, I guess the most important part of it is this whole notion of improving the supply chain. This is the response, of course, to the SolarWinds hack.
Right.
And the notion is that the United States has to get much better. The government has to get much smarter about who provides them with software and firmware and even hardware, and to ensure that that's coming from a trusted, validated supply chain, not just on day one, but on day 374, that the software you're receiving, right, is still secure. Good goals. We have to, the real issue will be, as many times, the task was given to NIST to basically give the government a standard on how to do this. So we'll see whether NIST comes up with a good one, a bad one, a politicized one, an apoliticized. I've worked with NIST on many standards, reviewed a number of them, and some are pretty good.
Right.
The cryptography ones are wonderful. To be honest with you, pretty much everything else, not so good.
Did you help author the cryptography ones? Is that why they're wonderful?
No, I did not. But I reviewed one actually. Yeah. Okay. So, anyways,
I'm being funny.
So anyways, yeah. But to be honest with you, the impact on private industry, not in the near term. Maybe in the long term, if something comes up with the government and they actually implement a standard, and that becomes part of the acquisition requirements and responsibilities for governments procuring software, then private industry can say, hey, we want to follow that same standard for our business as well. So, if you're going to provide software and firmware to my company, I want you to follow this NIST standard 800
Right.
dash, right? So then it could have some impact. We're at least, I don't know, you probably know as well as I, 2 years away maybe from seeing that.
Right.
Right. Even though there's dates assigned to when they have to do these things in the EO, I think we're probably 2 years away. So that's the big one. The other one is, government, you got to get smart about cybersecurity. You frankly just got to start doing it right. To be honest with you, they don't do it any worse than private enterprises. I get asked this question all the time. Isn't it better out in, the people in Congress always believe that people in industry do cybersecurity better than people in the government. The truth is they don't. The truth is they don't. But there's things about you got to harden your systems. A lot about zero trust, multi-factor authentication. All good things, without any real specifics, frankly. And then there's this notion that I like, that I really think is positive, is to have a cyber national transportation safety board. After there are major incidents like SolarWinds, like Colonial Pipeline, that this board will meet, do some analytics on what happened here, right, and make recommendations to the government specifically that have to be implemented. Things that have to go into the process, right, to fix, because that's something we weren't learning from incidents, right?
I think that one of the biggest benefits of the Biden executive order is going to be around data sharing. But the challenge is going to be getting private industry to opt in and participate. So that'll be interesting.
We are now on year 13, I think, of a national cybersecurity strategy for sharing cyber threat.
We still don't. No, we don't.
I think we'll be here 13 years later, still wondering, so where is it?
Right.
Yeah,
I hope not.
Number one, there's this notion that there's something to share. I'm not so sure there are. In a world where almost all attacks these days are 0 days, I'm not sure cyber threat intelligence is frankly helping you a whole lot. It's kind of nice to have. I don't know if I'd pay for it. And then, the people in the classified part of the government are still going to be unwilling to really share a lot of information.
Right.
And
that's right. They've got more 0 day information than we do, but there's reasons why they won't share it for national security.
Exactly.
But on the flip side, the executive order wants us to share our 0 day stuff that we may uncover. And so therein lies the rub.
Yeah, exactly. And industry's got to be worried about their legal liabilities, whether or not they have relief or not. Should I share this? What's the impact to us if we do? And some lawyer in OGC is probably going to say, oh my God, don't do this. So this is I don't know any country, frankly, that does sharing really well.
I don't either.
It's the classic conundrum. It's all full of politics and it's ugly.
It's a great idea, just tough as hell.
Wonderful idea. Wonderful goal. Wonderful idea.
So a couple wrap-up questions. We're getting short on time. What's the most important takeaway from your 25 years in the CIA? And secondarily, are there any tools you see coming down the pipe that are going to move into a commercial space that will help us solve some of these problems?
So let me answer the second one first. No.
Okay.
This notion about AI and machine learning is going to help us. I'm not really sure what that means or how it's going to help us. I do think, by the way, that a lot of the reasons you're seeing 0 days being used now by the bad guys is they're using AI and ML to go through source code, right?
They absolutely are.
And find obscure vulnerabilities in the source code of Microsoft Exchange that people didn't know about for 30 years. So no, I don't see anything coming down. Back to your first question, what are the things I learned? The first one, there's two. First one's not technical. It's that you have to have cyber as a part, and Dave, you know this very well. Cyber has to be a part of every aspect of your IT decision-making and your data decision-making.
Yep.
And if you leave the CISO and if you leave cybersecurity out of the mix and out of the decision-making process, you will eventually pay. For example, you will give a laptop to a systems administrator that allows for split tunneling, okay? Because you didn't coordinate that with
That's right.
CISO. Who would tell you, no, don't do that, right? So that's lesson number one. Cyber's got to be involved in every aspect of IT. Number two, that when you build systems, networks, operating systems, firmware, applications, hardening works. It simply does.
So patching, hardening, all that.
Right. Turning off services that aren't, all the classic, whether you use DISA or CIS standards for hardening things, I don't care, pick your favorite. Those organizations who do both those things I told you before, involve security in every decision and harden their systems, have less frequency malware attacks, and frankly are less likely to have ransomware attacks.
Okay. All right, I'm going to take one more question. We have a few extras. We'll close some of these out. But the last one I'm going to ask is around cloud, right? What do you recommend in helping protect the cloud? Because we're moving everything to cloud-based. Yeah. Right. Our data is moving to the cloud. We've got and there's a false sense of Amazon's protecting me, IBM's protecting me, Apple, or wherever the data is, they're protecting my stuff. Yeah. And the truth is, they're really not. So, any closing thoughts on that?
So I wouldn't say that they're really not. They are to the degree that the contract you signed with them does, enables them to do so, right? Now, one of the problems is I blame the customers of the cloud. Frankly, what I found is organizations who don't do cyber well on-prem also don't do it well in the cloud.
That's right.
And what I mean by that is they don't take advantage of cloud security services very well. They don't, frankly, write the contract very well. And they don't even, frankly, know enough to know about what to even ask. They don't even do what I'll call their due diligence and I may point the finger at some cybersecurity organizations, I guess. But frankly, you can do as well, and I think in most cases better in cybersecurity in the cloud if you do your homework. But I'll be honest with you, most organizations don't, regardless of size. I've worked with many, helping them with their transitions to the cloud, and frankly, most don't do it very well, and that's the problem.
So the takeaway is have better language in your contracts, right?
Do your research.
Do your research.
I'll give you a quick example.
Okay.
Amazon, Microsoft, and Google allow you to build private cloud instances where you basically own the entire hardware, and every virtual machine that will spin up on that hardware belongs to you. And there's a degree of isolation on that machine and in the network from all the other machines.
Right.
What percentage of global business use that configuration, do you think?
Not many.
Less than 2%. Right? And to me, it's a no-brainer. But that's just an example of features that aren't used. Most don't do encryption, frankly, right? They park the cryptography, the KSMs, even the HSMs up in the same infrastructure as the data.
Right.
Well, I guess you and I were both taught you don't do that.
No, you don't do that.
Sense.
I agree.
Right. So, kind of common sense things. But again, it's what I found is those organizations who didn't do cyber well on-prem, just doing it in the cloud doesn't make it any better.
Agree. Well, Bob, we're out of time. The 48 minutes just disappeared, which I love. Great conversation. We are grateful that you were able to fit some time in for us. For folks on the call, if you have additional questions, feel free to submit them. We'll get them answered for you. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of opportunity to do things better. And hopefully from here through the rest of this seminar and the other breakout rooms, you're going to hear some things on how to make that happen. Bob, thank you again. I appreciate it. And with that, Ian, this will end the presentation.